Good evening. Welcome to the budget work session, March 6, 2024 for the Lynbrook School District. If we could all please rise for the salute to the flag. Mr. Pat. All are present, except for Mrs. Aragona. Turning it over to you, Dr. Lynch.
Thank you, Mr. Belmont. So welcome to the 24-25 budget session. This was a very interesting budget to put together this year. So we have our new business official, relatively new business official, Mr. Press, who guided through the process. Just a couple of highlights that I know he's going to hit in his presentation. But I think what encompasses this entire budget this year is the uncertainty that's coming from Albany. So we have heard some kind of drastic numbers coming out of Albany. We've heard some relatively good news from people who were up there over the weekend doing some lobbying that may be about to change. But that uncertainty makes it really difficult to budget. So what we have done is we've presented a budget that does cut out a lot of contingency that we have normally had in place. We are a conservative district that tends to prepare for every emergency, so we've had to address some of those contingencies. And then we'll see an increase in some revenues coming from the reserves. So that's my high-level analysis of the budget, and I'm happy to let Mr. Press take it over from here. I just want to give a shout-out to our friends from the administration who are all here tonight. So you all know this process actually begins the week we get back. So the budget books went out in September. There's a whole process that goes on, and when we asked them to really dig into their budgets and take a look at what was needed, we established a new way to do staffing this year that had its bumps because it's a new process, but gave us, I think, some really good data. So I thank you all for being here tonight and for all the work that you've put in for the last few months. And for the first time in 10 years, I will be happy to turn it over to Mr. Press and close my mouth.
Thank you, Dr. Lynch. Can you all hear me? Yes? No? Move it closer? Okay. So Dr. Lynch covered the first 12 of my slides, so we can just go to slide 13 and go from there. But I do want to echo what Dr. Lynch had said about the help from the administrators. So thank you all for your assistance and your diligence in putting these budgets together for your buildings and your departments. It is definitely a team effort, a very large team effort. So I want to thank my colleagues in the central office as well for their direction, guidance, and assistance, and the business office for putting up with not seeing me for probably the last week, but also their help in reviewing numbers and things like that. So a lot of hands in this pot. This is not just me. I'm the one who's just lucky enough to have to come and present this to everyone here. Dr. Lynch had said we faced some challenges in putting this budget together. We faced a lot of increases in expenses that we have no control over, and then the governor's budget really didn't help things either in terms of her adjustments to the foundation aid formula, which caught a lot of people by surprise. I was up in Albany with the school business officials group in January. So we met there, and we met with some of the elected officials, including the chair of the education committee, who apparently no one had any idea what was coming. So the information we have more recently is that maybe things are going to get back to normal in terms of the foundation aid formula. There was something in Newsday yesterday. We heard, again, that from folks who were up in Albany that I know when I was up there, the elected officials were not interested in the governor's plan. So hoping we get back to square one, if not past that, and we get additional monies, because as you'll see, we had to dig, as Dr. Lynch said, we had to dig into some of our reserves just to make things work this year. And we did, you did take a good part of my intro, but saying, we did trim some of the contingencies that have been in the budget. Not so much that it gives me agita, because Dr. Lynch and I think we're kindred spirits in the sense that we're very conservative in our budgeting. So with that, we'll get moving. So the programmatic priorities for the district going into next year and what we've supported in this budget includes building a continuum of special education services at West End, at North Middle, and Lynbrook High School to provide the services for the students who need them where the students are. We are continuing our contracted social work and mental health support for our students and families who need those services. The budget also integrates the Ruler program, our social emotional learning program, into the classrooms, and continues to integrate the Science of Reading program in the intermediate elementary grades for those students who receive that instruction at the lower elementary grades as they move up through our educational system. That Science of Reading instruction will continue. In terms of staffing, much different story this year than last year. Last year's staffing slide had 2 pages in the presentation, added a lot of staff there. We are not doing that this year. We are adding to the professional staff an occupational therapist. We had budgeted for adding one this year. We're adding another one next year. The net effect really is negligible. These are services that we're contracting for with outside agencies at the moment. So when we add an occupational therapist to staff, that should eliminate the need for a contracted occupational therapist. So it's largely a trade-off. We are adding 2 additional teaching staff, but I just want to be clear, this is not part of the budget. These 2 additional teaching positions will be paid for by our special ed IDEA grant, that flows through what we call it our F fund, our special aid fund. So the budget that we're presenting tonight, for those who may not be familiar, is the general fund budget. That's the budget the community will vote on. The community doesn't vote on our special aid budget, so those 2 staff members will be paid from the grant. We are, through attrition, abolishing 1 elementary teaching position. We had a retirement, and we also had a large cohort of 5th graders at Marion Street that moved on to the middle school. And so being replaced by a smaller cohort, we did not have the need to replace that position. So the net effect in terms of adding staff to the general fund budget is 0 in terms of positions. The budget also does continues to support 5 FTEs of professional staff that were added after the budget from last year. And if at any time any of you on the board have questions, please just stop me and let me know. So on to the budgets themselves, starting off with Superintendent and Board of Education. Superintendent's budget is flat, so nothing really to report there. Board of Education has a slight increase, just over 2%, largely due to the increased cost of the legal notices that we're required to publish in newspapers. Newspapers are those paper things. Sometimes you can get them online now, but we still have to publish. Curriculum instruction and assessment, that's Dr. Balekis' area. We are seeing an increase of just under 5%, just over $59,000. We have some decreases, we have some increases. This is one of those areas where we have trimmed our contingencies and took a close look at programs that we may not really need anymore for various reasons, through reduction in enrollments, or resizing of programs. So our regional certification code is decreasing by almost $100,000. I want to be clear for the PTA folks out there, this is where the PTA assemblies come from. We are not at all reducing our funding of PTA assemblies, so that remains unchanged. We are seeing an increase of just over $100,000 in our budgeted charter school tuition code. We budgeted for 1 student this year. We got 5 additional students this year that were unbudgeted for. We pay about $20,000 to charter schools when our kids go out of district. So that code increases by about $100,000. The personnel, transportation, and student support services. This is one of those areas where you can see we're showing a decrease a net decrease. This is due to us really taking a closer look at the contingencies in the budget. So we are seeing an increase of about $125,000 in non-public school transportation. We are actually adding 5 new schools to our transportation for non-publics. Our BOCES transportation is decreasing for various reasons. The students, when they change schools, sometimes we can combine them and save costs that way. There's a decrease in some of the bus matrons that we use, and again, a little bit of the trimming of the contingencies. There's a reduction of just over $45,000 because we are able to eliminate 1 shuttle bus. We had 3 shuttle buses in the budget. We've been using only 2 for the last few years, so this was a third that was held for contingency, so we took that money out of the budget. And then a decrease in district transportation of about $118,000 due to the use of fewer vans and a reduction in the contingency there. We had some big buses on contingency. We just kind of tightened that up. Gives me a little bit of agita in this area, but I think we will be okay. What is not included in our transportation budget is any late busing. I know that's been a conversation that has come up in previous board meetings. My note up there is that in the sort of the situation where we provided late busing for every school and every student, and using big buses for that would cost about $2.1 million. That's not, for that to happen, that's really not likely that would happen because we could combine routes, we could maybe use vans instead of buses, vans generally being cheaper than buses. But there is no budget for late busing in our proposed budget. In order for us to do that, I would need some direction from the board. And we'd have to actually change policy first, but I want to open that up to the board to see if we want to have a conversation about late busing.
I think when we get towards the end and we talk about reserves, I think all of us have reviewed this already, and we see that we are already in the red by $2.7 million with this budget. To add a potential cost, even if it's not $2 million, even if it's only $1 million, that's a tremendous hit in a year when we really don't know what Albany is going to do. And I know I said this last year, and I'll say it again. We are a public school district, which means we're responsible for all of our students. And I don't think we can pick and choose which schools we provide late busing to. So it's either all or it's none as far as equity goes. And if we do all, obviously that looks like a tremendous budget hit that I don't think this year we're prepared to handle. That's my personal beliefs.
Yeah, Sean, I think Mr. Murray, you raise a really good point that when we look at this, obviously, I think we've heard some really impassioned pleas by members of the community as to why a late bus would be helpful. I think we all understand that. We'd all, in an ideal world, love to provide it because I think there are some really strong arguments being made. They were made last year, they're being made again this year, and the people really do have a need. But I do think there is an overriding policy that if we're providing it to one school, we have to provide it to all schools. It's not for us to sit and pick and choose and say, this school, we're going to give a late bus because they have 20 students, but this school only has 18, so they're not going to get a bus. I think it creates negative incentives, and it also creates winners and losers, where really we're supposed to be providing equally to all. So, and I think you also raise a really good point. When we get to the later pages of this budget, and we're fine, it's reassuring at the end, but there are some scary pages along the way, in particular where I see millions of dollars coming out of reserves, which if we have to do that year after year, it's not going to be pretty at all. And to add an additional cost right now with the current structure of New York's foundation aid being questionable because of what the governor is doing, and all sorts of unfunded mandates coming down, I do think it's a little scary to add any cost into this budget, and then this falls into that category, unfortunately.
Mr. Press, I have a question. Is the estimated $2.1 million, would that also be adding late busing for Lynbrook students, in-district students?
Yes.
Okay. I mean, I know we've said this, it's already been said tonight that this is not the year to do this with the way that the state funding is. And while I feel for people having to deal with their kids after school, I worked and had 3 kids go through the Lynbrook School District and still had to figure out a way to get my kids home after school. So it's just something that everybody has to deal with, and, $2.1 million is a lot of money at this time.
Anything else from any of the board members? For the community, the way the process works for the budget hearing is the presentation will take place, the board members will address any questions or comments. At the end of that part, there will be an opportunity for public comment, which will be solely limited to the budgetary issues. Nothing else on the board. Moving on. Thank you, Brad.
Okay, thank you. So now on to my office, the business office. So we're seeing in the business office an increase of 10%. That is more than the other central offices, but that was not done intentionally. I did not increase my budget just to do that. Most of this stuff we have absolutely no control over. So we're seeing a $66,000 increase in our BOE central data processing costs. We have some staff, IT staff that is provided to us through BOCES. So we've gotten some really good new staffing. Recently, there's an increased cost to that. We have new cloud security service as well. We added food service software to manage the new elementary school program. And there's some advanced engineering costs. This is a little weird, but BOCES sometimes will, when we pay for a service, they split it up between 2 codes. I won't bore anyone with the details, but they do that for a reason. We were budgeting that all in the IT budget, but it was really being paid out of half the business office, half of the IT office. So we just moved half of that into the business office code. BOCES administrative fees that we are required to pay as a member of BOCES are going up $30,000. And there's about a $100,000 increase in insurance. Our main general liability insurance provider this year increased rates 16%. No one that I know in any district anticipated 16% increases. So we are over budget in that code this year. So this $100,000 increase is a budget to budget, but it's not a budget to actual, because our actual to budget's probably more in the range of 50 to 60,000. But NYSER, our insurance company, told us, they haven't come out with their rates for next year yet, but they told us to anticipate the same level of increase for next year. So,
Mr. Press, just a question, is
Yes.
that increase being seen by other districts throughout Long Island? That's not
Yes.
just a Lynbrook thing, that's a Long Island or statewide issue?
It is really a statewide issue. It's being driven by Long Island, according to the NYSER people, just because of the losses down here, but also they're seeing a lot of losses related to, well, it was Child Victim Act cases, and it's also weather related. They're seeing flooding losses as well. So they are, well aware that we are not happy, but at this point we're kind of, we are where we are with them. But yeah, other districts they told everyone, they said your range is 12 to 17% this year, unfortunately.
And a related question, for a homeowner, a car owner, if you don't like the rate you got from your insurer, you try to shop around. If Geico's no good, you go to Allstate or whatever. Do schools have that option?
We can't. It's a very, very small market. There's one other provider in the state that I'm aware of that does insurance for schools. NYSER has 90% of Long Island business down here, which is good and bad. I mean, when something hits Long Island, they're covering, a lot of the districts on Long Island, so they are getting hit. But it is something that when you see increases like this, it does make me want to go and explore other options. All right, on to debt and interfund transfers. So debt is largely flat. We're in the 5th year of a 20-year bond payment. So this is on a set schedule. We're going to be around 1.8 million for another 15 years. Interfund transfers largely flat as well. These are the transfers we do. We have $5,000 that we contribute to the school lunch program, and then part of this is covering the costs related to extended school year, our extended school year program. Moving on to facilities, increase here is just under 5%, about $167,000. Again, we're seeing ups and downs here. We're seeing a decrease of $100,000 in fuel oil. This is an area where we had built-in contingencies a couple years back. I know in the district I was at previously, and I'm sure that happened here because we all get oil from the same place, the fuel oil costs they did triple. So we built in contingencies just in case anything like that was going to happen again. We've been very fortunate the last couple of years. I'm comfortable enough reducing those levels of contingencies. Additionally, we've added natural gas as a fuel source to some of our buildings. And so you'll see, we're seeing an increase in natural gas costs there, in part because of the increased use and in part because we're budgeting for an increase in the rate. Electric's going up as well, $174,000 budget to budget increase, largely due to the addition of lights at North Middle on the field. We are, actually the next slide will talk about finishing the lighting project at Marion Street there as well. And so we're budgeting for an increase in electric for the lights that we're adding down there. Additionally, we're anticipating an increase in the electric rate there as well. We're also seeing an increase in water. The rate there is doubling, but it's on a small base, so the impact is relatively small. So capital projects in the budget every year, we include money to address certain projects capital projects throughout the district. This year we are focusing in on one big project, that being finishing the lighting project at Marion Street for the field and the parking lot. We just as an update, we had bid this out. Most of the work is done. When we bid this out, it came in way over budget, so we didn't have enough to finish the lighting. We did run the conduit, and we have the bases for the lights in the parking lot. So the next phase of it should go much quicker, in theory. So we've got $700,000 in the budget there to finish that lighting project. Onto the school buildings. The elementary schools, we're seeing an increase of almost 22%, or $75,000, $47,812. It's a combined increase across instructional supplies and equipment and office supplies and equipment codes. We need some new cafeteria tables at Marion Street and some outdoor benches and picnic tables. And we are replacing some very old teacher chairs and folding chairs that I'm told haven't been replaced maybe in 30 years. So it's about a little bit past their useful lifespan. So we're starting the process, not replacing all the chairs at once, but slowly. It's about $15,000 there in anticipated contractual activities, salaries increases. This is for clubs and things like that. So we're seeing an increase there, and at the secondary level, and then at the elementary schools, just again, some inflationary pressures on some of the instructional supplies there. Paper costs have gone through the roof. It's unbelievable how the costs have gone up there. At the secondary schools, about $32,000 in anticipated contractual activity salaries increases and expanded high school clubs. Just over $31,000 in increasing instructional supplies codes due to additional technology supplies and some new family and consumer science equipment. We're getting some new KitchenAid mixers for the kids there and some food processing equipment, and then just general inflationary pressures. And then a $5,000 increase in transportation for additional field trips, including Frost Valley.
Mr. Press, if I could
Yes.
just, while we're talking about the increased, expanded high school clubs, I think that's awesome. One thing I will say about this high school is there's a lot going on after school. There's something for everyone, which is wonderful, and I appreciate Mr. Sorosi and his team looking to include even more students. But while we're talking about expanding secondary after-school activities, I'd love us to look at the possibility of extending the number of weeks that we offer the teen center in the middle school. I know that all of my children have enjoyed it, and all of them have had a gap between when the weather got nice enough to really go outside in the evenings, and when the teen center ended. So it's just, as we're thinking about secondary school clubs, I would just love for that to be looked into.
Okay. And something we will definitely discuss. Okay, moving on to special education. Here we're seeing an increase of about 10% in the budget, largely due to increased tuitions, private, public, and BOCES. We are continuing the funding for the psychologist. It was an outside psychiatrist, I'm sorry. That money continues in the budget so we can continue to provide those services to our students and families. And then in terms of the tuition codes, we're seeing an increase in placements outside of the district. You'll notice the BOCES number is fairly high, especially in comparison to the public and the private. We are budgeting for a fairly significant increase in out-of-district placements in BOCES settings. Transportation is likewise increasing a bit here due to some new schools and some new needs, matrons on the school buses and things of that nature. We are seeing an overall decrease of about $124,000 in related services codes. That is due in part to we had an expensive aid that we had anticipated in this year's budget that we no longer need, so that funding will come out. Some of this is related to us being, hiring our own occupational therapists, and then I did a real deep dive on these expenses over the last several years, and we kind of right-sized the expenses there as well. Communications and technology. I took a little pause because little partners in crime over there. Technology is expensive. So there's an increase of almost $140,000. That's a lot of money, Stephanie. In BOCES network administration. What we're doing there is we fund the replacement of our devices that our students use. So we've been funding 2 classes of devices replacement every year. We've added a third into the budget. We've been covering some of that out of the use of the reserves, the tech reserve. We're moving it into the budget so that we'll have basically a 4-year replacement cycle on devices. So if we have 3 grades, every 4 years, essentially, all the grades will be refreshed. There's also the addition of the new Parent Square communication software that Mr. McDermott and his committee have recommended to the district. There's an increase of $33,000 in computer repair. That is due to a warranty we need on the equipment in the innovation room here at the high school. And then our BOCES network support is increasing about $22,000 due to new software subscriptions and moving some existing software into BOCES. And then the decrease in district telephone, there was some equipment that we bought last year. We don't need to buy that again, or I guess this year. This year we bought. We don't need to buy that again next year, so there's a decrease there. Athletics and health. You good? We're good? Okay. Increase here of about 3% or $52,000. We're increasing supervisions and the anticipated contractual expense related to those supervisions. So that's the increase there. And then in terms of coaching salaries, there are a couple of coaches and assistant coaches that were added after the budget this year that we are continuing to fund into next year. And then we also have the anticipated contractual salary increase there as well. Fine and performing arts is up just over 6%. Art supplies are, I guess, also feeling inflationary pressures, so they're going up. Music supplies are going up due to us. We're looking to replace the choral risers at South. I have seen them. They have put in their duty for the district for a number of years. I'm getting nods from Ms. Gannon over there. So we're looking to replace those. And then a decrease in instrument rental and repairs because we just signed this year the second part of our instrument replacement program through BOCES. Guidance and counseling, largely flat, very, very small increase here. This continues our social work services through Central Nassau Guidance and our job coaching program, which is through CEO. That's correct? Excellent. Yes. All right. Special programs, this is summer playground, summer school, and adult ed. Increase there of just about 1.5%. We just increased the rate for summer counselors as minimum wage has increased. Salaries and benefits, this is the largest part of the budget. It's about 75% of the budget. We're seeing an increase of about 2.8% in salaries. Again, it's not necessarily due to the addition of staff, because like I said earlier, we're adding 1 FTE, and then we are through attrition, we are abolishing another 1.0 FTE. Again, we're adding 2 new positions of professional staff, but paid for from the grants. So these increases in salaries largely due to contractual obligations. Benefits are increasing about 6%. We're seeing increases here again in areas that we have no control over. Health insurance is dictated to us. We've seen double-digit increases in the health insurance rates now for about 4 years in a row, which is unbelievable and unsustainable in my opinion. But that's resulting in an increase of about $540,000 in health insurance. In terms of pension costs, again, so our employee retirement system pension payments are dictated to us. The rates are dictated by the state. Those rates increased from 13.1 to 15.2% for next year. And that effectively for us is an increase of about 16% in the rate. So we're seeing an increase of over $500,000 in our ERS expense. And then Medicare reimbursements, where we reimburse our retirees for their Medicare costs. And then there's a health insurance waiver that we pay to some of our retirees who don't take the health insurance. So that's going up about $261,000. That's due to an increase in the number of retirees and an increase in the rates as well. So putting that all together, this is what all those budgets look like. We're proposing a total budget of $106,395,443. It's a $4.5 million budget-to-budget increase. It's about 4.47% budget-to-budget increase. In terms of how we're paying for it, this is where things get a little interesting, at least to me. Y'all might not find it interesting. Local revenue projection, adult ed and summer school, we take in money for folks taking classes at adult ed or going to summer school, summer playground as well. Those remain unchanged. Health from other districts, we get reimbursed from other districts for the health services that we provide to students at OLP. That's remaining unchanged. Rentals we charge for music instrument rentals, that's remaining unchanged. Pilot payments in lieu of taxes, we're seeing an increase there. We had a new pilot come on for the old feather factory. So that property came off the tax rolls. It is now a pilot payment. And then we budget in an increase in the LIPA pilot payment as well. So that increased about $200,000. Special ed other districts has not changed. We did increase our budgeted revenue from interest income. We are seeing, as I imagine you are seeing in your own accounts, interest rates at very high levels. So we are receiving this year a lot more than $950,000. I am aware that the Fed will start to lower interest rates. So we feel fairly comfortable using this number, even taking into account the fact that interest rates will be coming. We do anticipate interest rates coming down in our fiscal year period. But that's an increase of, a fairly sizable increase there. Miscellaneous revenue, we have increased that as well, just to kind of right-size what we've been seeing over the last few years. And then the number that we've talked about, and several of the board members have mentioned, our use of reserves at $2.73 million. That is an increase of about $1.25 million year to year. That was what we needed to do in addition to trimming some of the contingencies. That is what we needed to do to balance out the budget. We are aware, Dr. Lynch and I had many a conversation about this. This is a stopgap measure. This is not a long-term solution. But what it does is it gives us time to really do a thorough review of the district and the programs and the budgeting so that we can make a more thoughtful decision about long-term budgeting. So in terms of those use of reserves, we are budgeting $1.5 million from our ERS reserve. That's our reserve to pay the pension costs related to non-instructional staff. So we had used in the current year $1 million, so we're increasing that $500,000. That will leave us with about $3.6 million in the reserve at the end of next year. Our TRS reserve, that is for the teachers' retirement system. We have not actually tapped into that reserve before, but we're tapping into that at the rate of $700,000. That reserve will have about $3.1 million in it at the end of next year. Workers' comp, we increased that $50,000 to $350,000. And so that reserve will have about $1.4 million left. That essentially, it's a wash with the expense. We anticipate expense of about $350,000. That should all be covered by workers' comp. Similar with employee benefits, although that is at $180,000, that's unchanged from previous years. And at the end of next year, we anticipate a balance there of just under $2.9 million. In terms of state aid, the numbers that we're using here are the numbers from the governor's budget. We don't have any other numbers yet. The state is supposed to adopt their budget by April 1st. No one that I spoke with thought that was going to happen. Didn't happen last year. We don't think it's going to happen this year either. So we're using the numbers from the governor's budget on foundation aid. So foundation aid here, just under $14.5 million. Transportation aid at 1.6. BOCES, transportation and BOCES aid, those are expense-based aids. So we get basically reimbursed for the expense. So this is subsequent year. The aid they're projecting in transportation is based on our projection for spending on transportation this year, similar with BOCES. It's not a one-for-one, dollar-for-dollar reimbursement. We have aid ratios in these different categories that reimburse us at different rates. The high-cost public and the private excess cost, that's special ed reimbursements there. No major changes there as well, and any of the other changes either. Building aid at $804,000. So our total general fund state aid, and I broke this up, so if you look at the aid runs that you'll see in Newsday, or if you're intrepid enough to go to SED website, or you want to go take a look at that, you'll see more than $19.9 million. But what's added into that 19.9 is $842,400 of aid for our UPK program. UPK program is another one of those programs that's paid from our special aid fund. So it doesn't hit the general fund, so that's why I broke it out like this. So if you look at those aid runs from the state, you'll see $20,753,990. Now more fun, tax cap formulas. Yay. So we're going to walk through this tax cap formula. Please hold your cheering for those who get excited about formulas and calculations. Sean wants me to, you want me to talk about adjusted base? Not tonight? Okay, maybe next week. So the way the formula works is we start with the current year's levy, so that's the 74,989. We have the tax base growth factor, which is a distant cousin to the adjusted base proportion, but that's based on growth in values of properties in the community or if there's new development. So we multiply that rate, 1.0029, times the current year's tax levy. We add in the pilots, the payments in lieu of taxes that we're expecting this year, and then we back out the exemptions. So exemptions are, in this case, largely capital exemptions. So when we spend money on capital projects, we get to claim that as an exemption through the tax levy. That gets offset by building aid and other revenues along those lines. So when you subtract out the exemptions, you get the adjusted prior year levy, 77 million there. This is where that 2% comes in. So I know Newsday puts the big 2% on the cover of their paper, and they say 2% is going to be the tax levy limit. It's not. I don't know why they've been doing this for so long. They just don't want to get it right. So that's where the 2% comes in. So we multiply by the 2%. We subtract out our estimated pilots receivable for next year, and that's where you see that $200,000 increase. That gets us to our tax levy limit before exclusions. And everyone's still awake. This is great. Mr. Bellman has a
To
question.
go over the feather factory, another example, because we constantly talk about the pilots. I remember when the movie theater came up. So just distinguishing me the difference. So as we see here, the feather factory, which went from being that vacant building to the largest building in Nassau County now, for their pilot of the 123, that's what they're paying, pilot being payment in lieu of taxes. What does the $60,000 tax impact represent?
You know what, I looked at that today. I'm going to have to,
Even
that's
the-
a number that came from the
But
Nassau
even,
County
what does that
website.
section mean? What does that actually mean? Whether that number is 6048, what does that mean by tax impact? How is that is that what's being spread out amongst the community? How is that number actually transferred from the 123?
I don't know if you have a better answer than I will give.
So what that is, that is the impact on the Class 4, so they're all would be in business tax. So Class 4 gets spread out amongst all the business in the community. So that is about $60,000 that's taken off the rolls and then has to be spread amongst the other Class 4 properties.
So how much of that 123 are we actually getting?
We see the 123?
We see the 123. The pilot payment is actually 185,000, but it gets distributed.
That's a mess. So that's the difference.
Yeah.
That's the number we don't see. Right, that explains
Yeah.
it, right.
So then how does it impact?
But there is a negative impact on having a pilot as opposed to a building being on a regular
For us,
roll.
no.
For us, no.
For the taxpayer, yes. So
Right.
that's the
Okay.
important thing, so that we levy a tax, and the tax is going to be I'm in bated breath to find out what this formula produces to what our actual levy is. So when we hear that, what that number is, it's how it gets distributed amongst, there are 5,000 homes in the district, they divide the Class 1. There, I can't remember how many businesses there are, they divide the Class 4. So if there is money taken away from the basic tax formula, it has to be paid from someone, they shift it.
And that's where adjusted base proportions also come in, Mr.
So
Murray.
I don't want to beat this to the point because we do this a lot. The number they're actually paying is around 185.
Yes.
The 123 we're getting,
Yes.
that's in our hand. That other about 60, where's that money going?
That goes to it'll go, some of it will probably go to the library.
Oh, so the pilot, we don't get all,
village.
that's all we get for the pilot, the rest gets spread out.
Yeah.
And that's what you're reflecting here in the 60 that gets spread out to the rest. But the hope would be, and let's give them the benefit of let's take this number at the 183, it's still more than what the empty building was generated in taxes. The problem will be the movie theater now, which is paying the 138, because they locked in, is definitely generating much more money than they were initially. That's where the negative. So in the beginning, it looked to our benefit, the empty factory was doing nothing, but the movie theater got the benefit. So the landlord in the beginning we were getting the benefit. Now, with the way they're making revenue, we're not getting our fair share from what they're generating. So that's the trade-off.
Yeah, the theory in pilot world is you give them a lower amount until they can generate revenue, and then you break them into it so that they can recoup some of their building costs,
Right,
et
get
cetera.
back.
That's the theory behind it.
But we do, as Dr. Lynch said, we receive from the community whatever the amount is in the tax levy that we say that we need.
Right, so pilot, the buildings that are on pilot aren't costing the district any money. It's more that it's actually costing individual homeowners money because they're making up for that pilot, the payment in lieu of taxes, correct?
It'll shift largely onto the other commercial
Okay.
property owners. But there is, again, if you go back and, I mean, I joke about it, but that adjusted base proportion is how the county takes all of the 4 different classes of property, and commercial is class 4. This is how the county divides up the whole pie. So I'm sure it has a factor.
But
in there.
initially, the problem would be, though, when the feather factory was vacant and not generating any revenue, there was a very small number. This is still more money than we're getting than we would have had. The problem is going to be with the movie theater. Now that it's up and running and it's been successful for all these years, it's generating all kinds of revenue that we're not getting the benefit of. I guess that's the trade-off. An empty building with no revenue or a successful one with more, so.
Right.
Maybe the governor can use this new apartment building to house all the sanctuary people that need to come live in New York, so.
All right. So page 2 of the calculation, so we take that last number, just.
Wait, Mrs. Danino still has a question.
I'm just a little confused because, I don't know, I read something recently, and maybe I'm wrong, in Good Jobs First New York that said it did affect school district when the IDs were granting these. So I don't know, maybe it was wrong, but I was just curious why, like what would be the negative effect? Like why are, like I know they're proposing a bill for legislation now, they're fighting it, but I'm just.
People don't like pilot. This was what came up with
Right.
the movie. But here's the reason why. The
'Cause
movie
I know
theaters.
Valley Stream had a big issue with this in the past.
When we had with the movie theater, the problem is the person that comes out ahead of this is the owner of the movie theater. So that movie theater was in horrible shape, not generating any money. He's like, listen, guys, I'm not making any money. You're not getting any taxes from me. Give me a pilot that's just a little bit more than what the taxes were and lock me in for 15 years. We're like, okay, we'll take that because it's more than we're getting. The problem is now that he's doing better and better, we're not getting the benefit of that. He's locking in that low number. So initially it works out for us, but as time goes on, the only reason the bet works is to our benefit if somebody else comes in there and has something that's going to thrive on its own without the pilot. But the incentive is, do you want an empty feather factory or do you want something built there? So I would have rather had something other than a
And in
6,000
terms
room
of
apartment
school
building.
districts, it is material to the calculation of the tax cap. So it actually does affect our bottom line there, but it kind of nets out. So if you can remember a couple of years ago, actually, it was when the movie theater came on, I presented a chart because we saw a drastic reduction in the Class 4 property rate because of all the numbers that had come off it. So it has an effect on the community in general and the school district as a member of that community.
Because there's a bill out there right now prohibiting IDAs from waiving school taxes. They're trying to put that into
Complete
legis-
waiving of taxes.
Yeah.
Pretty much it compounds for us because the reason why the layouts are so important for that apartment building is it a studio and a one-bedroom, or is it 3-bedroom apartments where you're going to have another 60 kids moving in without adding to the tax base? And that's why communities are trying to make sure that they limit those to being limited rooms so families don't move in and overwhelm the district, so.
And this board, just historically, you are probably one of the few boards in Nassau County that have asked this question every year, and you pay careful attention to this, so I always give you credit for we always have to become prepared, because it is something that's been interest of you.
Yeah, I think, the one thing, and we saw it here last year, is when these pilots come on, they have an effect of reducing the tax cap, right? And you see it in here when you increase the amount of pilots, it lowers the tax cap. So if you had, like the Valley Streams, a very large pilot that hits, I think it was that year their tax cap was negative. And so what's going to happen now is when that pilot falls off, and depending on how large it is, it has the opposite of effect. So if your pilot is $10 million, basically it allows you to raise taxes $10 million. But in this environment, if that's, an 8% tax levy increase,
Well, let me ask you, so if we look back at the movie theater, which is paying about let's say $650,000 in their pilot, we're getting $138,000 of that other 5 goes to other parts of the community. Does
Yes.
our portion ever change? I know that pilot is
Yes.
fixed, but what's the determination how much of that pilot we'll get?
It's whatever the agreement is that the
Oh, the agreement
IDEA
was pre-stipulated going
Yes.
forward to what our percentages would be. So not only their increases, but the amount that goes to the schools and everything else.
The total payment of the total pilot payment increases generally over time.
Right, that will increase, but our percentage of it.
And
does
our
that-
percentage will also increase. In some cases, it's not in every case, but
Okay,
in some of those cases, the percentage does go up.
right.
Can I ask another question? Sorry, on a
Yeah.
little bit of a different
Yeah.
topic. We send money to the charter schools. You said it increased. Do we have any oversight over those, since we're sending money for those students? Is there any oversight over what goes on with those students there, since they're taking the public funds?
Not that I'm aware of.
Dr. Belekas, you want to? Sometimes just getting attendance records from them to pay the bill
So,
is tough,
that
to be
is-
quite honest with you.
I
That-
hate to say it, but that's really what it boils down to. You know, we need to, Dr. Berman has to have a proof of residency. Once that happens, you know, we do ask for attendance records to make sure that they're charging us only for the months that the kids attend. You know, there has been some fluidity there over the last couple of years, so we've had to question bills when the kids didn't get a September start. There's been other times where the kids have left mid-year, and that's why we ask for updated attendance records.
Have
when
they
put
been
the bills
sent
in.
back to our schools ever after, you know, just I know
There-
there's sent
There
often
was a
tends to be
family that did come and register in our school district last year. You know, there are all different circumstances why families do choose the charter schools, and a
And
lot
that's
of those,
okay, but I know
a lot of those
sometimes-
circumstances predate Lynbrook,
Right,
so
right.
that, you know, there are established relationships.
sure.
So
No, I know sometimes they have a reputation of, before testing, sending students back to home districts and, you know, to inflate scores and things of the such. But I'm just making sure, that kind of stuff. If we're sending money, that it's, you know, they're held to the same accountability as all schools.
All right, so just to jump back into the tax cap calculation, because I know you were all waiting to see how this turns out, like Dr. Lynch. We take that tax levy before the exclusions, sorry about that. We add in our debt service, our capital projects, there's that $700,000 we talked about earlier. There's BOCE's capital exclusion, which is just, we get credited with money that BOCE spends on capital projects, basically. And then there's an ERS exclusion. If you recall, that ERS is the employee retirement system. When the rates increase more than 2%, the tax cap formula allows us to claim an exclusion for anything above the 2%. In this case, it's 0.1, which gets us a whopping $9,800. We take back out the building aid, gets us to our allowable tax levy limit, which is $76,649,752. That's a 2.21% increase. So that is our tax cap to the 2.21%. So now, just in terms of how we determine, so that's our allowable levy limit. What we do is see how much of that levy we need to fund our budget. So we start out with our proposed budget, the 106,395,443. That's our $4.5 million budget to budget increase. We look at our state aid revenue and our local revenue, our projected applied fund balance. Here, there's another area where we are increasing. So we were about $1.275 million of appropriated fund balance. In the past, we increased that by $250,000 as well. So that gets us to our estimated total revenue of $29.6 million. And so the difference between our estimated revenue prior to the tax levy and our proposed budget is the $76,649,752. So the plan here is that the tax levy that we are proposing is to tax to the maximum cap that is allowed. All right, any questions? All right, so then moving on, we're going to talk about our use of reserves. These are different reserves. These are not reserves that are used to offset expenses that are in our budgets. This is us setting aside, these are capital reserves that allow us to do capital projects. The costs that come out of these reserves have absolutely no impact on the tax levy. So this has no effect on the budget, has no effect on the tax levy. This is money that's essentially already in our account. We're just asking, and we'll talk about, the community would need to vote to approve this, but we're asking the community to let us spend money essentially out of our bank account. So out of the technology reserve, we are looking to continue our wiring projects throughout the district at a cost of approximately $135,000. And then device replacement, again, I talked about this earlier. We used to replace more of our devices from the technology reserves. We're only looking to spend $119,000 on device replacement this year for a total use of the technology reserve of $254,000. That would leave us with a balance in the reserve after use at the end of next year of $913,289. Again, no effect on the taxpayer, no effect on the tax levy. Similarly, we have our facilities reserves. We are proposing a number of projects to spend money out of our facilities reserves to address capital projects throughout the district. Again, similar, no effect on the taxpayer, no effect on the tax levy. We are looking to renovate 5 faculty classrooms here at the high school. At Marion Street, we did a beautiful new cafeteria down there. The ramp leading down the side of the cafeteria is it's in bad shape. So we're looking to redo that concrete there, as well as some concrete along the side of the building outside of where the cafeteria is. At West End, we had in prior years bid out roof replacements above the Voyager room. Those bids came in above budget, so we did not have enough money to complete that project, so we are looking to take money out of the reserve to complete that project. And then at the administration building, we're looking to renovate 2 restrooms there as well for total costs of $1.4 million. That would leave us with reserve balances in our facilities, capital, and grounds reserves of $5,361,021. And just so to wrap up, a few reminders. Budget adoption is scheduled for next week, next Wednesday here. A budget hearing, which is required by law, we will present that on Wednesday, May 8th. The last day to register to vote for this election and this budget vote is May 15th, 2024. And the all-important budget vote itself, May 21st, 2024. And just lastly, if anyone has any questions from the board? No? Okay.
I had a few questions that I want to, first of all, thank Mr. Press for the time he took with me earlier to meticulously go through the line-by-line budget. But there were just a couple things I wanted to ask that jumped out at me in that line-by-line budget. Specifically, just looking at my notes, there was a big increase in the equipment codes at the high school and at Waverly Park, kind of out of line with what's been going on other years. And I was just wondering what specific projects those equipment codes are paying for.
So the equipment codes, just to address sort of at the high level, they will vary from building to building and year to year, depending on the projects that need priority attention. So for the high school here, the reason why that budget code increases, we are looking, this is a conversation we had with the facilities committee, actually out here on Union Avenue. We're looking to put in planters, large planters, for security purposes. I mean, we're going to dress them up, and Mr. Sada's crew will make them look nice. But the main intent there is to enhance security along the outside of the high school here. So that's a large part of that budget. Just want to see. I think that was about $55,000. We're also looking here, so also on the sort of security front. So right now we have walkie-talkies in the district. The custodians have them, a lot of the administrators have them. We have one emergency channel that is accessible throughout the entire district and actually even beyond the district. What we're trying to do is now, for security purposes, build in a second sort of a redundancy in the emergency channel in case the first one fails. And in order to do that, there's equipment that we need to purchase to do that. So that it would also be housed here, just because it's centrally located. So that's at the high school. Waverly, we are, so our insurance company comes through the district once a year, and they help us to identify potential hazards to avoid insurance claims. One of the things that they pointed out this year was we have a number of bleachers, outdoor bleachers, throughout the district by our fields that don't have side rails. And so they recommended that we replace those bleachers with bleachers that do have side rails. So we're looking to put 2 down at Waverly. I think we budgeted for 1 actually at the administration, the field over by the administration building as well.
So if people see a disparity between the buildings, it's health and safety concerns, and some buildings have more than others.
Yeah, I mean, that's largely it. In some cases, there's some work. I know we are planning to replace some of the lighting in some principals. In Marion Street, the lighting there is old. When we replace the old lighting, we like to put in LED, so there's funding for that. So that's specific, at Marion Street. So we try to do little bits every year, spread it around the district.
Another question, the health insurance code was going up 4.6%, but yet we hear double-digit growth every year, double-digit growth. So how does that 4.6% work if we're looking at increases more than double that?
So there's a couple of things there that, one that kind of helps us. We, like many districts on Long Island, have healthcare buyout provision. So employees who choose to opt out of our healthcare, we give them a certain amount of money. Overall, it's a healthy amount. That amount isn't subject to these double-digit increases in the health insurance. So that is part of the sort of the cushioning effect. The other thing is that increase that we're showing is really just for the second half of the year. So the increase, when we say we're seeing double-digit increases, it's right now we know what the rate is for calendar year 2024. The health insurance companies increase their rates January 1. Our fiscal year doesn't coincide with that. So we know what the rate is basically for half the year next year. So and we budgeted the increase in the 2024 rate already. So
So kind of like split the increase over the 2 years.
Right, so basically we're seeing that increase for half the year, so that's why it's basically half as much.
And the last 2 questions kind of go together. They have to do with contingencies and the reserve. So, you spoke on a number of slides of where you've reduced contingencies in different codes in different areas, such as the shuttle run. And I guess my question with that is, are we truly comfortable with that? Because unlike a homeowner, like if we get to the budget, like there's no credit card for us. Like we can't borrow. If we hit that's it. There's no more money to spend, and we can't spend it until the next July 1st. And kind of going along with that, are we comfortable with the amount that's going to be left in those reserve funds after we take, $2.75 million out of them?
Okay, so just in terms of that shuttle bus, Dr. Berman and I had a conversation about that. I feel very comfortable that we will not need that shuttle bus, that third one. We have the two have been serving us, and that should be more than sufficient. In terms of the reserves, I myself am a little uncomfortable at the level of reserves that we're using. That is not a long-term plan. We'll have conversations. I do not anticipate that continuing. It's a temporary measure. I mean, part of the thing is we have these reserves for times like this when we need them. We're not reducing staff. We're not really reducing program. We're maintaining, and we want to be able to do that. Will we be able to do that ongoing? We'll have a conversation about that, and we'll try to find creative ways to do that. But we didn't. I'm comfortable doing that for 24-25. We can continue to spend at that level, but for a very short period of time. It's not sustainable if we can't replenish those reserves. So it is not my intent anyway to recommend budgets that spend reserves at that level going forward. And that's a conversation that we'll have, at central office and with the board for subsequent years.
And can I just piggyback on that? So I think, as a compliment to this board, the boards that have gone before you, and this community, this doesn't just happen. You are seeing in other districts the closing of buildings, the laying off of 40 staff members. You have always been, and your predecessors have always been, incredibly fiscally conservative. You allowed us to get reserves. You know, that's not every district story. So we are not in fiscal stress. We've not been in fiscal stress so that we can weather a storm like this, and that's to the community's credit. So we didn't have to put out, okay, you know what, we could have had to propose as many as 10 or 15 staff layoffs. We decided this is not, you know, this is something that we don't have to do because we are Lynbrook, because we can sustain something like this. As Mr. Press said, this is not a sustainable strategy, but we can weather a storm or two. Hopefully, certain things happen. We have big retirement years, and there's attrition that goes on. There are certain health costs that level out or go down to normal 5 and 7%. Those are the things that the vagaries of the budget process tend. But again, I think we need to really point, and Mr. Belmont, you've always been big on this. The state has written districts up for reserves, and I think we have always said, and I said this to the community all the time, hey, that's our money. We'll decide what we do with it. And if we want to put it in the bank so we don't have to lay off staff 5 years from now, we're going to put it in the bank and not lay off staff 5 years from now. That's what we're doing this year. So kudos to you as a board and your predecessor boards, because it's been a long time that this has been your budgeting philosophy.
And as long as we're throwing out kudos, just kudos to the administrative team and the central office for making, I know there were some tough choices here. I know there were plenty of things people wanted that they were not allowed to ask for and were not allowed to put in that budget. Just being a school administrator myself, I know what that is. So I want to thank everyone for all the work that went into that. And then specifically Mr. Press, again, for the tremendous amount of time you spent with me going through that line by line. And I know that anyone in the community who has questions, knowing Mr. Press for many years, I know that he's willing to answer any questions that might come his way.
Absolutely. Thank you. And some of those cuts that I made without talking to people, so. Hi.
She's finding out now.
We've heard some talk that this has the governor's current budget with respect to foundation aid, but there is some talk that her current budget has been widely rejected by both parties in this state, and that the hope is that she'll restore foundation aid to the level we all think it should be at. If the governor does do that and we get more foundation aid than this budget projects for, would that be used to reduce the amount that's coming out of our reserves? Is that where it would go?
That is the plan. That's actually a great question. I'm glad you brought that up. But that would be, the plan would be, if we did get additional state aid, which I would propose anyway, reducing our use of reserves.
Okay, right.
Seeing nothing else from the board, again, as Mr. Murray had indicated, great job as we do every year, not just the administration, to all this work that's done in our buildings. We know it starts with our teachers and works our way up at each of the buildings. We have always historically, for all the years I've been on the board, have done a great job in getting our budget done, and we stay within our limits. We pass at a very high percentage every year, so it's just one of the strongest things we do. So excellent job by all involved.
And then also to that, 2.21 being our limit, and I know we're not usually going right to the limit, but it's actually below the middle for Nassau County, even at the limit, where we're being very responsible, because I've seen the whole list of all the other proposed increases right now, and we're very, I think anyway, taxpayer friendly with that.
All right. And this is the second thing within the last year that Queen Hockle has tried doing with her housing plan and then with our school budget, trying to impact what we do on Long Island. It doesn't matter where you are in the state. We should be controlling our money. So unfortunately, very few community people are here, but those that watch on TV or follow up and understand, those in the community, you should do everything you can to make sure with your elected officials that you and your community control where that money is spent, and it's not dictated by the state. It's extremely frustrating, the things we have to do and the hoops we have to go through to meet the agenda. What happens in upstate New York or what happens in 3 towns over from us is not the same as what happens in Lynbrook, and we should be dictating that. Mr. Lunar, can you talk about the candidates for the BOCES board?
Sure. So the BOCES board consists of 9 individuals who serve 3-year rotating terms. So each year, 3 different board members are up for re-election. This current year, there are 3 candidates up for re-election. Susan Bergstrom, Martin Kay and Michael Wienick. I could sit and tell you a lot about them, but the most important thing to tell you is they're running unopposed. So since no one else is running, I recommend that we vote for those three candidates. I sit on the calls. They do a very good job. They go into a lot of detail. They all take the job very seriously, and they've all done a very good job. So I actually do recommend.
I think we're all comfortable deferring to Mr. Luner's discretion on that, and so a resolution nominating the candidates will be on the agenda for next week's meeting on March 13th. Just to repeat before we go to public comment, so the budget adoption will take place next week on March 13th. There will be another budget hearing on May 8th, and the last day to register to vote will be on May 15th. Regarding that, as far as voting, a new law went into effect in September this year. The Early Mail Voter Act allows for qualified voters to request an application for an early mail ballot without supplying a reason on why they cannot appear at the polls on the day of the election. So information about the early mail voter application ballots can be found on the district website under Budget and Finance. At this time, we will have public comment. Anybody who wants to address the board, we're limiting those comments just to the budget. You can come to the microphone, identify yourself if you do live in or out of district.
Good evening, Kim Cyprian. I'd like to discuss the part of the budget on slide 6 regarding transportation. A couple of questions that I do have in regards to that. The $2.1 million proposed, is it public knowledge? Can we see the work that was done to come up with that number? Was that done this year? If so, who kind of was working on that as one of the proposed plans?
Okay.
Yeah, you get it. I believe that's a FOIL request. You can FOIL that and get that information.
Okay, so that's the one proposed plan that's in here. As we said before, this is a working session and it's a planning session. So were there other plans discussed and as options for the transportation? So if there was one that showed the $2.1 million, do we have one for the other suggestions that the community I made in regards to a centralized drop-off location? What's the proposed cost of that? Was that considered? And why is that not as a proposal? Because as we said, the mayor has not, the governor has not adopted this cut yet. So yes, we're planning for it, but do we have 3 other plans in place specifically for transportation? One being the centralized drop-off. I'd love to know, I'm sure the community would like to know, what was the total cost of that? I guarantee it was not 2.1 million. Did we reach out to East Rockaway School District? Did we discuss potentially working together with them? Did anybody call and reach out to East Rockaway School District?
Yes.
So we have a proposed plan and number in place for that as well?
We do have an idea of a share, working with East Rockaway. We have looked at other plans as well.
Okay, so those, when I send the email to request that, I'll be able to see 3 plans and 3 price points, that what it would cost us?
Depending upon the FOIL and what the attorneys approve, you'll be able to see the information that is publicly available. I see where your question is going. So at the point during the board meeting when Mr. Press presented the options for the busing, the board did not express an interest in looking at any of their options.
But yet you said to me before that the board agreed that we were going to look into it and work on it. So Mr. Press, you said before when you were discussing the budget, nobody came up to you and asked. So does that mean not one person on here questioned about transportation?
So
You can get it. I think Mr. Lunar, I assume he's going to elaborate for you. They did address it. The issue wasn't, you can answer, Mr.
Yeah, so I will tell you, we did discuss it internally at least 3 internal meetings. We really have thought of 100 different options, and we've talked about different permutations.
But we've been presenting you information since September,
Let me
and
just
these budget
finish,
cuts
man.
just came out, talk about them just weeks ago.
It's not solely budget cut related. So a couple points. The first is we did discuss a lot of different options, and I think the consensus on the board was that the board isn't comfortable giving transportations to some students, but not others. So we'd have to look at a proposal that works for every school. And then on top of that, these budget cuts by the governor, they've been out there for months. This isn't, it's new in this proposal. We've known and we've been talking about them for a couple months. I think 2 months ago they were mentioned at a board meeting. So we're taking that into account. It's not just an economic decision. I think a lot of the board felt, and again, we all feel strongly that you have very good arguments. The kids, we'd love in an ideal world to be able to give busing to these kids. A lot of us feel very strongly about that. But the problem is picking and choosing. So there's about 115 different kids that currently go to private schools. Only 20 or 30, I think 31 of them go to Kellenberg. We
40.
can't have a solution that only gives a bus to one school but ignores the others.
Agreed.
Adding a bus for every single school is, and even if there was a centralized drop-off, and even if we partnered with other schools, it becomes very cost prohibitive, even in those, under those works. Now, we don't have, I don't personally have all the numbers, but look at this budget. We're taking $2.7 million out of reserves. If we have to do that for 2 more years, some of those reserves have a negative balance. That you can't, we'd be laying off teachers, we'd be cutting programs, we'd be closing buildings. We
I
can't do that.
understand what you're saying, but you just said 2 different things. At first, you said it wasn't about the cost perspective, yet here it is, it's presented that it is as of cost. We're well aware that it is of cost, we know that. But you just made a statement and you said, it is not only about the money, it is about your personal opinion. So this topic has been brought up for years, well before me, right? So has this new board recently said that we all agree we're not going to be an all or nothing? Do you know that of your 19 schools, you have 8 of those schools that have 1 student? Have we talked to those 19 schools? I guarantee you not all of those 19 schools have late bus needs. And we, in the school district, right, we have 7 schools in our district, I believe. Okay, it's not an all or none. You have so many schools that have these specific needs, right? But not every single school gets everything that they want. And I understand that. But are you trying? One thing you're telling me it's money. Now you're just telling me you guys don't agree. It's you want to give it to everybody or nobody. But you have 8 schools that have 1 kid. Do they even have after-school needs or late bus needs?
So the problem is, just practically speaking, let's just think about it. If you go to those 8 students with the 8 schools that have 1 kid, and those kids say, right now I don't need it. And then the next day a kid moves in to go to that school and needs it, now we have to add a bus. If we budget for the 1 kid, you know, little Joe goes to a certain school and we say to little Joe's family, do you need a late bus? And they say, no, we don't need it. But tomorrow, a new kid moves in to go to the same school and
And they
wants
need
it.
to come to the next budget
No, it
meeting
doesn't-
and
it
talk about it.
No, because if we have a policy that we're gonna open it to every school that needs one and a kid moves in mid-year, we have to give them a bus.
So how is it that 50 of the 55 school districts that attend the non-public schools are making this work? I'm super curious. That's why I'm asking you, give me a job. Tell me something to do. Have we talked to them? How are they making it work? Not one person has been able to answer me on that.
I would say the reason why that occurs here and not in other places is because a school like East Rockaway probably only sends kids to 2 or 3 schools where
But we're guessing. Did we sit down with them and get the specifics?
we did a lot of research on this.
Years ago. Has it done
No,
it this
no,
year?
no, recently.
I did survey all the schools that we currently bus to find out who has transportation needs for late busing in the event that we were to move in that direction. I've researched how many children are utilizing the bus on a daily basis versus those that are not riding the bus. I've researched all of the schools, the ones that have singletons that go to a school and those that have multiple children that go to the schools. So and then all of the ideas that you've suggested about utilizing a centralized location, looking to coordinate with other districts. For example, if we were to look at Kellenberg, since that's where your child is attending right now, looking at Kellenberg, the number of children that we have between the Kellenberg school and the lower school, I have 44 children. I'm not going to be able to coordinate with East Rockaway because I still need to budget for 1 bus for those children. Ideally, yes, I'd like to be able to share the bus with East Rockaway, but for Kellenberg, that's not, I don't see that happening. And when we do budget, we have to budget with the intent of every possible scenario. So the figure that we're looking at is looking at every single child having every opportunity to participate in a late program, whether it's sports related or a club or it's extra help. So those are all the things that we're looking at. And then on the other side, if we were to, when we are considering the late busing, we're looking at one specific time. You need to keep in mind, there may be one child that needs to leave at 5 o'clock, another child needs to leave at 5:15.
The other school districts don't do that.
So,
It's
no,
one
they
time.
don't. And what I've done in the research that I did with the survey that I sent out to all of the schools, I questioned them, what is the time that they would need that late busing? So that I would have that information as well. So the research is current. It's the same research that I did last year, and the year prior to that. I've tweaked it each year because there are more specifics that we look for. So again, the number that you see is the number that's the extreme, because we have to consider that when we budget. Can we come up with other options to make it a lot smaller, to have a smaller group of children that would have the benefit with a much smaller cost? Of course we can.
But the 2.1 is
but
for
is-
one centralized location, because in my opinion, that is probably the most cost-effective. So that's, again, providing all the schools, right, all the children to one location, or to multiple personalized drop-offs, like it is in the morning?
This particular one
Yes.
is multiple locations.
Right, but
this
that's
one
why
is
I'm saying,
specific.
why didn't we try to be a little bit more cost-effective on this?
And what I'm saying to you is that is the extreme, but I have gone through the research, not only to find out who needs the programs, but what other options can we consider? How can we lessen cost? How can we look to group certain schools together? What other districts would I be able to coordinate
So that's
with?
all been done
So
this year?
That is all active information for this year, because it does vary from year to year. We do have different schools that we transport to. There are different numbers of children that go to the different schools. So they are all different things that we have to look at. each
Because
year.
I too have reached out to East Rockaway and am waiting a response back from them as well. So I will request the information. I appreciate it. I look forward to seeing the 3 different plans and the pricing.
Thank you.
Seeing nothing else in the community, just as a reminder, our next meeting will be next week, March 13th at 7:30. We also have scheduled our meeting with the Joint Council for the evening at 6:30. Can I have a motion to adjourn the meeting? Mr. Murray, second. Mrs. Marcus, all in favor? Thank you. Everyone have a good night.